Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a tech war that's being fought with, well, basically invisible materials. China is tightening its grip on rare earths, and we're going to look at the global race to break free. So let's start with a question that, probably hits pretty close to home, because the minerals that power the phone in your pocket, they're right at the center of this huge global power play. Okay, first things first, what are we even talking about? Well, rare earths is kind of a misnomer. They aren't actually that rare in the ground, but they are incredibly difficult and, frankly, messy to process. Think of them as the secret ingredient, the vitamins in everything from an F-35 fighter jet to the motor in your electric car. All right, let's get into the big news here. On October 9th, 2025, Beijing unveiled a new set of regulations that, and I'm not exaggerating, completely changed the landscape for these critical materials. So here's what's new and why it is a massive deal. China isn't just controlling the raw materials anymore. No, they're targeting the technology to process them and the entire supply chain. And that 0.1% rule, that is a game changer. It means even a tiny, tiny amount of a Chinese rare earth in a super complex product could suddenly put it under Beijing's export control. And the market reaction? It was immediate and it was severe. This quote really tells the story of just how sensitive global supply chains are to these moves. All of a sudden, the cost of building those high-performance magnets just skyrocketed. So you might be asking, how dominant is China really? Let's look at the numbers, because they tell a pretty powerful story about why those new rules matter so much. First up is mining. We're talking literally digging the ore out of the ground. China dominates with about 70% of global production. But you know what? That huge number isn't even the most important part of the story. Because the real bottleneck is what comes next: refining. This is the super complex process of turning that raw ore into usable elements. And here, China's control jumps to a staggering 90+%. So this is the crucial point right here. Anyone can dig dirt, but the technological and industrial power to separate that ore into the high-purity materials you need, that is where China's real leverage lies. And there's another really critical layer to this. See, not all rare earths are created equal. The heavy ones, like dysprosium and terbium, are the most valuable, and they're almost exclusively processed in China. These are the ones that are absolutely essential for the high-performance magnets in our best against tech and all our green energy projects. Okay, so faced with this pretty overwhelming dominance, a global effort to build alternative supply chains is finally speeding up. Let's take a look at how the world is trying to fight back. From Australia to the Americas, we're seeing this coalition of companies and governments investing billions of dollars to break this dependency. And these aren't just small side projects. For many, these are strategic national security initiatives. Now, the biggest breakthrough we've seen so far came from the Australian company Lynas. For the very first time, the world's most critical heavy rare earths were produced at scale completely outside of China's ecosystem. This was a landmark moment. It proved that it was actually possible. But, while all these efforts are really promising, we have to ask ourselves, is it enough? Is it enough to make a real difference? This is where we need a bit of a reality check and look at the hard data on scale and time. First, just look at the demand side of this equation. It is exploding. Driven by this massive global shift to electric vehicles and wind power, demand for these high-power magnets is on track to triple by 2035. The world is going to need a lot more of them. Now, let's compare that surging demand with what we can actually produce right now. The initial target for the big U.S. project, MP Materials, is about 1,000 tons of magnets. China's estimated production, 300,000 tons. The West's output is still less than 1% of China's. That's not just a gap, that's a canyon. And this number? That's the timeline. Building just one of these new refining facilities, from breaking ground to actually producing something, takes 5 to 7 years, and it costs over $500 million. There is no quick fix here. So, what does this all mean for the future? When you put all these pieces together, analysts are really seeing two potential paths forward. Well, first, history actually shows us that change is possible. After a similar supply crisis back in 2010, Japan got really serious. Through strategic investments and partnerships, especially with Australia, they managed to cut their dependency from 90% down to nearly half over 15 years. So the optimistic view is that, with innovation, new discoveries, and these smart investments, we'll eventually create a truly diverse and resilient market. But the more critical view warns that the current efforts are just scratching the surface, and that many of these non-Chinese supply chains might still secretly rely on Chinese raw materials, which leaves them vulnerable.
The reality, as it usually does, probably lies somewhere in the middle. There's real, tangible progress being made. But achieving a meaningful balance of power isn't a short-term project. It's a marathon, and it's a marathon that will likely take us well into the mid-2030s at the very least.
And that leaves us with a central question, doesn't it? The world is finally running the race for its own supply chain, but with demand exploding and China reinforcing its lead, is this a long marathon to independence, or is it an impossible race against time? So let's just quickly recap the key points. China has strategically tightened its control over the entire value chain. The real bottleneck for the rest of the world is processing and refining, not just digging stuff up. And while the West is finally responding, it faces a massive gap in scale and a very, very long timeline. True diversification is a 10 to 15-year marathon that has really only just begun.
Thank you so much for watching. We really hope this breakdown helps you understand the complex and kinda hidden forces that are shaping our technological future.